All right, guys, welcome to another episode of Leadership Thinking here at Grading School. We're going to be continuing the series of non-traditional education. I think you were getting at the benefits, but before that, we're going to be talking about
the disadvantages of traditional education, which we almost completed, by the way. Okay, there are some points that are really important points that we do need to cover, though. For example, that misbehavior is something that the teachers have to deal with. And what we're finding, and what most studies show, is that students misbehave when they're not engaged, right? So the problem isn't the misbehavior, but rather, how do we engage the student that replaces that misbehavior? So traditional education doesn't have a solution for that, okay? Obviously, the next disadvantage is that they rely on what they call the bell curve, which is probably the single most absurd thing that there is in education. It says that all students are going to fall within a range, and you're going to have students who are below average and students who are above average, but most students will be average. And non-traditional education parts from the premise that all students are intelligent and that all students want to learn. So the idea that there's going to be students who are below average is an absurd idea. And then to quantify it, to say this number of students will be there, absurd. What we're finding out when we do the studies here with our students is that it's more like a hockey stick, where we have very few students who are below average, and some students are average, but a humongous amount of them are above average. Okay, they're not geniuses. I gave a tour one time here, and the student who was watching the class said, "Wow, all these students are geniuses." I go, "No, there's regular students who are engaged in what's happening in the classroom." The big difference is that. The other one, this one burns me up because so many people believe this, okay? It's that you have to give a lot of homework because that's how students learn. To make sure they learn a lot, you give them a lot of homework. Alfie Kohn, who's the main proponent against this idea, wrote a book called The Homework Myth. In that book, he used a meta-study, and in the meta-study came out that from grades pre-kinder to 8th grade, homework has very little value, okay? Almost none. As a matter of fact, the results showed that it was contrary to what they wanted. Instead of the students actually learning more, the students were developing an animosity to the school and to learning, the process of learning itself. As a matter of fact, there are studies that show that as students grow up, they begin to feel less and less engaged and less creative, so that you have a student, for example, in preschool who's 100% creative. Everything that happens to him is new, so he's really creative. And as you go up the grade levels, the creativity actually decreases. And that is definitely a result of what traditional education does, because traditional education preaches conformity, follow the rules, do what all the other students are doing. It doesn't foster creativity. Okay.
Yeah, definitely. It basically states like this is the precursor. This is the only thing that we're going to do, and you have to follow what I say. That's right. That's what traditional education is.
And students grow up conforming to that. Okay, yeah. They go, I'm not going to change my thinking because that's not going to get me a good grade. I want to get a good grade in this class, so I do exactly what the teacher tells me to do. There's nothing that kills creativity much more than that. And homework does the same thing. You have a student who's in school 35, 40 hours a week, and then you tell him go home and do another 2 or 3 hours of homework. Okay. Yeah. We wouldn't ask that of a regular employee, but we're asking that of students. And what one study, an interesting study came up and said that 2 hours of additional homework every day for a student will raise his grade by 0.8%. Not even 1%, 0.8%. Okay. Yeah. So it's not to give homework. There's a specific type of homework that you give. It's homework that develops a high-order thinking skill. And there's a lot of, and when we get to that section, we'll talk in detail about that.
I want to say something about that. Instead of providing homework or a challenge, you have to create an environment. We work very hard to create an environment where the students' higher order thinking skills are developed to a point where when he gets to his house, to his home, he's thinking about what he learned or about what he was doing because he was engaged. He loved what he was doing because all the 4 C's were engaged and working together, right? He collaborated with the students. he was able to match his creative thinking with his critical thinking skills, and he also had to communicate. And when each and every one of those fours, and I think there's two more, you can talk about those two or three more, the student is thinking about what he learned and how he can fulfill that possible solution that didn't came right at the moment. Because most things in life and most things when we're working, the solutions are not right there, right? When we're working, I'm talking about real life when we are in a workplace. Most things are not instant. So if we create that environment for our kids to keep thinking about that problem in an engaged way, it's much more efficient.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the engagement is an important part. It solves so many problems. If you have a student who's engaged, he's not going to get the disciplinary problems, So we'll talk about that more into the future as well. But the idea of homework, I have to keep bringing back to the homework. There is a type of homework that is very beneficial, and it's the homework that fosters and promotes high order thinking skills. It's not quantity, but quality, okay? And there are a lot of people who say, well, this school gives 4 hours of homework. That means they're a rigorous school and the kids are really intelligent. That's completely false. The reality is that students who get less homework, allowing them to participate with their family. As a matter of fact, studies are showing that the best thing a student can do for at home, for academic achievement, is to eat dinner with his family. Eating with the family has been shown to have a direct link to positive academic achievement, much more than the quantity of homework that you get. Now, the studies show the difference in high school. In high school, yes, homework has more value. Okay, doesn't mean that we can inundate a student in high school with homework either. But the right type of homework given to the students in high school promotes academic achievement. Okay, and we'll talk more about that when we get into the homework section and stuff like that. Okay. There are more. Okay, there's a classroom should be quiet.
Right.
I hate quiet classrooms. When the classroom is quiet, I think something is wrong, because that's not the natural state of children. The children's natural state is to be active and to make noise. Okay, and but it's a kind of a directed noise. It's not just a crazy mass of noise. I just want to hear noise. No, I want to hear noise of students working to achieve a purpose or a goal. And when that happens in the classroom, then genuine learning goes on. Okay, so it's not whether a classroom is quiet or not quiet, but rather what the students are engaged in. There's another myth that they say students today read less than students of past generations. And they say, well, they're reading Facebook, they're reading Instagram. But Pew Research did a study on that. And they found out that the students of today actually read more than the students of yesterday. That the quality of what they're reading is higher quality. That quantity of what they're reading is more. And I can get into the details of the study itself, but what it says is that they compare our generation, or our previous generations, to today's generations, and today's generations are reading more. And they're accessing reliable information on the internet. Okay, and I couldn't do that because we didn't have internet, obviously. But the students today are doing that. But they did a questionnaire to our generation today. And the question dealt with how much important information is there on the internet. And the students of today decided, the survey showed that they said there's a lot of information missing, important information missing from the internet, more than our generation. We think the internet speaks more truth than the students of today. And I think that's kind of an important issue, because sometimes we feel that today's students get into the internet, they believe everything. That's not really true.
That's one of the things we teach here at the school with the traditional education is how to do research. And since we have this vast amount of information from the internet, how do you know which information is correct? Sometimes you don't even know, but at least you start to develop a researcher mind, right? Scholar, researcher, practitioner mind from very little, because our kids have access to the internet right from the beginning. Right from from kindergarten and up, they start doing things with their tablets, computers, and once they go further up the ladder to the other higher grades, have more
access to that information. And the thing about non-traditional is that the teacher, right, the facilitator, creates the environment, and I know I say this every time, for them to figure it out. But there are certain limits and there are certain rules. Where are you getting that information from? Do you think is that true? Oh, I got that information from Facebook. Do you think that's really a reliable information? Or should you triangulate that information, right? And when you triangulate, you look from different sources to figure out if that information is correct and find out the critics from different perspectives and watch out your own bias. Of course, the higher they get, the higher the quality of their work. But for kids that are very little to start doing that, it's very amazing how it works with non-traditional. If you do it traditional way, they're not going to have access to that because everything is already given to them.
That's right. And that's one of the things we spoke about that before, where they have to create their own content. Okay, so all in all, traditional education, and people say, well, why don't we just get right to non-traditional education? Because we have to know what the errors of traditional education is before we can begin to attack and correct all those mistaken ideas. And it's unfortunate because still a lot of teachers believe in these mistaken ideas. It's a sad thing because you cannot go to the next step of non-traditional education if you believe that any of these things are true. And I would say, well, research it yourself. Don't take our word for it. Research it. Okay? Yeah. Now, when we go into the benefits of non-traditional education, now I start to get really excited about that because I love that part. First of all, the job requirements. We're preparing students for jobs that we don't know what they're going to be in the future, but we have an idea by seeing the tendencies. Okay, so we know that there's certain skill sets that they need, and when you study the skill sets that were needed back in 1970, where the first three were, the first one I think was reading, the second one was computational skills or math, and the third one was writing. Okay, right. It was writing, computational skills, and reading. And when you look in the job requirements for 2020. Completely different. Critical thinking, creativity, and managing people, managing personnel. So it's a very different. Now we're talking about communication, creativity, high order thinking skills, as opposed to back in the 70s. Now the question becomes, why? Because the job market has changed. Back in the 70s, we didn't need digital learners. We didn't need people to create programs. Today, we do need that. And in 20 years, 30 years, we're going to need other things too. And like I said, we don't know what's coming, but we see the tendency. We can prepare the students based on those tendencies so they're ready for that kind of job market.
Of course, just like you said, in the 70s, we were in the Industrial Revolution, and that's what they needed. Right now, we're in the AI revolution, right? The intelligence revolution. And for that to work, we need people with higher order thinking skills, right? They have to be creative. They have to be able to solve problems, not only work on your solutions that you created as the boss. No, they have to be able to, as a democratic party, right, as a collective, be able to generate ideas to solve a very complex problem that usually happens in our workdays.
In real life.
Yeah, in real life.
Sure. Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up about that, about the Industrial Revolution, because the idea of traditional education is based on that. In the 1840s, with the Industrial Revolution in full bloom, what they needed was a completely different kind of employee. They needed the employee. He didn't need to know a whole lot of stuff. They just needed him to know how to sit down and do some movements, And still today, traditional education, where it exists, uses that model of teaching. And so that's really counterproductive. Today's students, when we talk about the 4 C's, yes, those 4 C's are crucial because those are the skill sets that they need at this time period. And a lot of parents even still haven't bought into that. It's important that they understand that. Communication is crucial. Today, they're not going to be working alone. They're going to be working in collaboration with some other people. And they may be on the completely other side of the planet, and still they're working together and communicating together.
Those are the virtual teams.
That's right, virtual teams. And so, this is the job force of the future. My eldest daughter works in online, and her job, she never goes to her job. All her job is completely online. You know? So this is just the way the job market is today and will continue to be to the future. High order thinking skills and creativity. Well, the highest order thinking skill is creativity. And so if we can develop creativity in our young people and that they don't lose it as they go through the grades, we're not asking students to conform, we're asking students to create based on knowledge that they've acquired, be it new knowledge or old knowledge, whatever. Create new things. And because we push that creativity element, then they're creative all the way through high to 12th grade. And non-traditional education, that's one of the key elements of non-traditional education. It fosters high order thinking skill. The highest high order thinking skill is creativity.
And some people have a erroneous concept of what creativity is. Usually people think or associate creativity with arts. And
That's right.
that is creativity, but creativity is also finding new ways to build different solutions.
What I want the students to do is to use the knowledge they've acquired to solve either problems or situations in a new and different way. Now, about the creativity is really important. Sometimes people believe, well, creativity means to create something that nobody's ever done before, you know. Right. And while that would be great, the reality is that, you know, it has to be in accordance with the grade. And for example, a first grader, for him to do something creative, maybe something he's just never experienced before, but he's done it, but it's been done before somewhere else. But he hasn't done it. For him, it's original and creative, and that's what we want to do.
Of course.
It's an important thing. Now, there are other elements involved. We have, especially today, with cultural diversity and the understanding that we're a multicultural society.
Yeah.
Just, you know, so we have to learn to deal with different ideas and concepts and cultural ideas and concepts. Okay? There's also the idea of autonomy, where, you know, you're not going to be directed by a boss all the time. And so we want the students to learn how to do things on their own. This happens from very young as well. And then ultimately the digital learning, that today's student can get information anytime, anywhere. Okay, that the teacher isn't the source, the root of all knowledge. The teacher, as a matter of fact, the concept of teacher should be completely eliminated. Everyone should be a facilitator, not a teacher. I think the worst thing that you can call an educator is a teacher today.
Right.
Plus, and I think this is an important point too, is the deep learning that comes from a student being engaged and doing the work by himself. In traditional education, the active worker is a teacher, and the passive learner is a student.
Right.
In non-traditional education, the passive worker is the facilitator, and the active worker are the students. And so, and a real good case of that is, for example, summer learning loss, which everyone complains about in traditional education. You know, when summer break is on, the students lose 2.5 months of math skills and over 2 months of reading skills. So that when they come back to school, they have to now recover that. That's another 2.5 months to recover the 2.5 months that they lost in math or 2 months that they lost in reading. In non-traditional education, that should occur because the students learn deeply. That means the 2 months passed by and they didn't forget their fractions, you know. They didn't forget how to multiply fractions or divide fractions, you know, or they didn't forget the major theme. And there's reasons why that occurs. There's reasons why they don't forget the major themes of the story. And we'll talk about that in the future, but I will mention that when we tie emotion into the learning process, then the learning is more deep, okay? And so the activities that they do in the class not only stimulates their intellect, it also stimulates their emotions. And when emotions and intellect plus will get together, there's deep learning there, you know. And the thing is, you don't have to force it. You know, the teacher doesn't have to say, well, I have to make sure that he knows this information.
Right.
No, they learn it naturally in the process. So the focus should be on the process and not on the end result, okay? Because the end result will come.
Right. If
you do the process correctly, the end result comes. Because non-traditional education is hands-on. So the student will learn while he is doing. And this is a wonderful, wonderful way to learn. I wish many times I visit the classrooms here and I see the students doing hands-on work. And I said, boy, I really would have loved to have learned that way. Because I learned the old way, the passive learner.
Yeah. One of the cool things that you see in our classrooms, which is starting to begin now, again, thanks to the lowering of the pandemic, it's a totally dynamic classroom. Usually the kids are not listening to the teacher. They're working in groups all over the place, and to an uncommon eye that comes and see that and say, oh, this is crazy. What's happening? Oh, this is non-traditional education, right? The kids are engaged. The kids are working towards an end by themselves with obviously some guidance, so they can figure out their own purpose of what the theme is, right? I want to go back to the new 3 things, right? We know the four C's for success in the future in the 21st century, but I want to go to cultural diversity. Yeah, I want to start with the cultural diversity, and I think here in Puerto Rico we're in a disadvantage because we don't see too much cultural diversity as you see that in the United States. So to learn to work with people that have different cultural backgrounds and that might not work or might not be motivated by the usual norm of how people are motivated here in the United States and Puerto Rico. And in case you go to Mexico or you go to Japan or you go to other places where religion is not the same, where the way of thinking and management is totally not the same, the power culture of, for example, female versus male in other places in the planet, it's totally different, right? And things that might work here in a management style of, for example, a transformational leader, which works towards, motivating people to work and do more democratic decisions to develop a product or give a service, might not work in other places. So how do you adapt yourself and how you've been working for the past several years to that particular situation? So to develop the skills for students to be able to adapt is something very, very intrinsic in non-traditional education, even if we're in a disadvantage in Puerto Rico.
Sure.
Because
It's a perceived disadvantage.
Right.
These kids can communicate pretty much. Just this morning, I woke up early this morning. I do a lot of business with Chinese people, and as soon as I finished, I had a conversation with my wife this very morning, and I said, the Chinese culture is such a fascinating culture because they're so respectful. Respectful to the extreme, almost like it sounds almost not real,
Right.
But having worked with them a lot, I know that they're very genuine. They're very, when they say that they're very kind to you and they say kindly and these kind of things.
Yes.
And it's not just only a business relationship. Yes, I have this relationship with them, but that's not the only reason why I like that. It is part of their culture of the way they are.
Yes.
Same thing with the Japanese people. I have a lot of interaction with Japanese people.
Correct.
They're extremely polite. And I think our students have a lot of interaction, even though maybe not even in the classroom, but they do have access to a lot of internet things, and I know for a fact that they communicate with other people all over the world. One of the things that we can and we should be doing more is promoting that cultural diversity and connecting.
I agree.
Because we have the tools available. Okay, and I know that we've done that before, that we've communicated and contacted other countries and students have had opportunity to engage with those students from across the world.
Yeah.
One of the things that I was promoting a couple of years back was a sister school program. And I was contacting with Rich Cord International Academy and Bronx High School of Science and those top schools in the nation who agreed to make sister programs with us. So I think we're just starting. I think we have a lot of things that we can do. We've not even begun to touch the tip of the iceberg of the potential of what we can do with cultural diversity with the students. And I know that a lot of the activities that they do in the classroom deal with those, especially with the new social issues that are coming out and Black Lives Matters and things of that nature. Students are doing a lot of research with that. So while, yes, in a presential manner, they might be limited to, but we use technology. That's the limit to that.
Yeah, and the loss of our rights, which is another thing, right?
Another wonderful team that we need to talk about.
Going through that cultural diversity and going to the Asian way of thinking, when you move to business transactions,
they take more time because they want to know you before they do business.
Exactly right.
And that's why when an American goes over there to do business, it's kind of frustrating for him at first if he doesn't know the culture, right? And that's what calls cultural shock. They want to know you as a person because they want to do business with you as a person. They want to develop trust. And once they do that, which may take a little more time, then the business comes.
But see, there's a problem. We don't train our students, or not students who will become future businessmen. We don't teach them in this cultural differences. You know,
I used to work with a Japanese company in Hawaii, when I was in Hawaii, and some of the things they did were fascinating. And the bosses always filled me in. He said, they're going to give you a business card. You always receive the business card with two hands. You always place it down on the table. You don't stick it into your pocket. And if there's 10 businessmen will give you their business cards, and you will receive it with two hands and put it right there on top of the table in front of you. They don't conduct business in the office, so when they would come into the office, we would laugh, we would joke, we wouldn't talk business. Business is conducted over dinner, and that you're sitting down discussing that and there's so many little things like that. You know, if you receive the card with one hand, you can pretty much count that you're not going to have their business. You know, even when they understand that you don't understand their culture. If there is an assumption that if you're interested in doing business with them, that you're going to discover how you're going to deal with them, you know. And we can even extrapolate that to our students and our parents. Okay, because there are a lot of parents who are into the traditional form of education. Now, as a parent for a student here in Malian School, it behooves me, it's to my benefit, to really try to understand what is this non-traditional education thing they're talking about. I think that a lot of them have their kids here and don't really grasp the concept of what non-traditional education is. And if they do that, I think they can better support their kids in the learning process. You know, that has been my experience anyway. So
yeah, I agree. And to finish with the
cultural diversity,
which is a very interesting issue, issue. I was reading the other day that usually in the United States and Puerto Rico, when we want to correct people, we should do it like we're doing right now. We're talking. I've been saying this, and this is the feedback that I'm giving to you. And in those places, students do it like that. They do it by memo, or they do it by writing, which is very interesting. And one of the things that, and to finish with it, is I've talked to people that work with international companies, and they have to fly over India, Japan, all these places. And I asked them, do you receive a cultural background information? Do they give you like a package? They told me. And they tell me no. They tell me no. So it's, you know, and what they say is that I have to do that myself. I have to become an outer learner about the culture. But if those places could have, you know, at least a package for 2-3 hours of information on how to conduct business over there, would be great.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah, I never drank. I told you to step. But if you're meeting with Japanese businessmen, you have to order a drink, even if it's just going to sit there and you're never going to touch it. But if you don't order a drink, then that's to them kind of insulting, you know. Other things like crossing chopsticks on top of food, those things are not, you know. So, and they to them, it makes all the sense in the world that you should know this if you're doing business with them. So, yeah, I'm a high proponent that they should give cultural education to the people who are going to deal with international cultures. You know, very important.
So going back to the other two,
autonomy and digital learning. Okay. Well, autonomy is pretty much self-explanatory, where we want the students to become a self-learner. And of course, in the classroom, that's what it is. So sometimes parents say, "Oh, I get a call from parents. Hey, you know, I'm really upset because my son asked the teacher this question and the teacher didn't give him the answer." So you should be really happy when that happens, because the facilitator is teaching your child to discover the information by himself. You know, no, he's supposed to give him the answer. No, that's not his job. His job is to guide the student to discover the answer. That's why I said parents should really, really deeply understand how the process works. Okay, and that's just part of the way it is.
What's the term? Auto learner?
Self-learner.
Self-direct learner. Yeah. Also, which is part of our student
profile.
Self-direct. All right, and then the other one was,
The last one,
the last one, yes.
digital learner.
Digital.
That today's students are digital learners. And interestingly enough, one of the critiques that we had of traditional education was that teachers use technology as just an add-on. I'll do it every once in a while, but it has to be all the time, all the time. So, when it's aquí, todos los días, todo el día.
With a purpose.
With a purpose, obviously, directed by the teacher.
You can have all the technology in the world, but you don't know how to use it, you don't know how to implement it, or you don't know how to get the value from that, then.
Sure. It's just a tool, and like any other tool, you have to use the right tool to do the job. If I'm trying to drive a screw into a piece of wood, I'm not going to use a hammer. Right? I'm going to use a screwdriver. The facilitators here are trained very well for that. They know if we want to achieve this kind of thing, then this is the tool we want to use. This is how we want to use it. Okay. And one important thing is that we allow the students to use the tool when they use it appropriately. Okay. And we guide them to use it appropriately. We don't leave it hanging, So, but does that mean that we're always going to control? No, we can't always control. And parents may sometimes feel that they have to control. You can't. What you want to do is teach the student to use it appropriately, and then rest assured that when he learns to use it appropriately, he uses it appropriately. Okay, that's just the way it is. And students have to be engaged in the classroom. That's kind of like a key element of any non-traditional program. If a student is not engaged, you're going to have problems. Okay, a couple of years back, we had when I first started, 2010, when I became principal here. Remember, we have 59 disciplinary problems just in the intermediate level alone. Okay, these last few years, almost none. Okay, because students are engaged. It was an interesting time. I remember it back then because I had to resolve all those 59 problems, but that's what it is. And now the role of the teacher, and this is another thing that we have to realize, that the teachers have to stop calling themselves teachers, right, and start calling themselves facilitators, because that's really what they're doing. And what happens with that is that you have less teacher burnout, because when you understand the role of a facilitator, then you don't have that pressure that a teacher has. The teacher's accountable to make sure that little Johnny knows this information. The facilitator doesn't. The facilitator has the accountability to create the environment for little Johnny to learn to the degree that he can learn. And usually the curriculum, what's demanded by the curriculum, is less than what little Johnny can actually do. Okay, I'll give you an example of that. There's a science teacher here, fantastic, implements non-traditional perfectly. He allowed the students to create their own tests. Okay, and when they created it, the students created the questions, and he would select which questions would be on the test. When they did that, he came up to me and said, "Mr. Sánchez, look at this. These questions are much more difficult than the questions I would have put on the test." Okay, so here we have the students themselves going beyond what is expected by the curriculum by themselves, not because the facilitator implemented it, not because he forced them to. They themselves voluntarily did it. I also have another example where we had to make a decision of a book to read, and we were reading a literature in 11th grade. The student said, "Well, is it possible that we can change this literature?" And I said, "Sure. What do you want to change it for?" And then they told me the series of books. And I go, "Sure, we can change it. If we do all 3 series of the books, we can change it." All 3 series total 1,200 pages. Okay, the book that they were replacing was about 250 pages. So you're talking about students voluntarily changing 250-page book for 1,200 pages of additional reading. This is what non-traditional education can do. This is where you can get them.
Yeah, that's the concept of I don't like to read. Well, you don't like to read because you're not interested in what you're reading. But if you have something that's interesting and engaging, you're going to read it. You're going to be focused on it.
Exactly. And then we go more. As facilitators, we promote student discovery. The more the student discovers, the more engaged he's going to be. The less the student discovers. So when this parent calls up and said, "Hey, he didn't give my child the answer," my first response is, you should be thankful to God because he didn't steal your child's opportunity to discover by himself this knowledge. And so facilitators, they do a really good job of that, of promoting the students to write. I can't tell you how many times I've received that phone call.
I bet.
But after I explain it, and they begin to understand, But there, of course, it's always the fear that parents who don't call have the concept that we're not teaching them.
Of course, and this is why we're doing this, so parents have the availability to have this information and why we're doing it. This is a scientifically proven.
Right. Two things. I always say evidence-based and data-driven. Evidence-based and data-driven. Not my opinion, not because this is not like I said, not anything new. Anybody can have this information. It's available. It's everywhere. But it's data-driven and evidence-based. It shows it works. It's not an opinion of Mr. Sanchez because it sounds good.
Right. And when you let the child and ourselves be surprised by our own discovery, it's gonna stick. Right?
And that's
it's gonna be there.
That's the thing. That's that aha moment. Yeah. There's that joy. You see, and interesting enough, because I was talking with one of the teachers the other day about those 30 points. And so she said, went to her class when she did it. We just finished talking about that. Just in my office, we just finished talking about it. She goes to her class, she implements it, and I walk by her class when she calls me and says, Mr. Sanchez, I did exactly what you had to do. And these students over here, and this student says, wow, I found out. And that excitement from discovery, what we call the aha moment, that the student really understands the concept. Doesn't happen a lot in traditional education because the student can hide. The teacher's talking. Did everyone understand? And the teacher automatically assumes.
Any questions?
Yeah, any questions? The teacher assumes that everyone understood. And the reality is nobody understood. But nobody wanted to be the guy who raises his hand and said, I didn't understand, Yeah, so that's what it is, Like I said, discipline problems are reduced and in many cases eliminated. The students who cause problems, it's because they're not engaged. What's going on in the class doesn't interest them. But when it interests them, boy, they're going to be really engaged. Give a student a video game. Sit them down. He'll spend 6 hours, 10 hours playing that video game. Won't bother you at all.
Make them do a game.
That's right. Create games. Coding. We're working with coding. Yeah. Okay. Non-traditional education has a lot of options, and it's right. We work with primarily with 5 options right now.
Let's talk about those.
Sure, but there are a lot more options, and I can name this: problem-based learning, project-based learning, flipped learning, cooperative learning, game-based learning. Those are the 5 options that we're working with right now. Each one has a specific purpose and direction. If you want, and because the studies say this is so, not because I say this is so. For example, if you're looking for a good review method, is game-based learning, where students can prepare for an upcoming exam playing games. And what the studies show, well, the students retain more information because now not only their brain engages with what's going on, the emotion is engaged in what's going on.
Right.
So this is a fantastic thing. When I used to have my students make the exams, because what kind of exams I used to give, but then I had to change it and have my students make the exams. When they began to make the exams, there was a parent who wrote to me. I'll never forget this parent. She wrote to me and said, well, the students know the questions ahead of time. I said, yeah, but you have, for example, you have 5 groups of students, each one of them creating, 50 questions. So I get 250 questions. Now, it came to the point where the students realized, holy cow, these are the questions that are going to be on the exam. So maybe if we, as a group, we make a copy of the exam. So we hand it into Mrs. Sanchez 1 copy, we keep an additional copy, and we share it with the group. Now what's happening? You have all the students are now studying 250 questions from a novel that they wrote using questions that they developed that were much more difficult than questions I would give them. How can you not learn? And so this just works. Of course, if you want to do other things, for example, cooperative learning, there's a lot of skills that are developed in cooperative learning. So people say, well, they have to learn intellectually only. Just give them the information so they know it, so they memorize it. Yeah, that's good for the brain. Okay, but what about the other skills that they have to develop? Okay, how am I going to learn communication if I don't communicate? Okay. How am I going to learn collaboration if I never collaborate? Okay, so these are important points that we have to promote. And yes, it's harder. Yes, it takes more time. Okay, it may be slower. The teacher can tell you something in 1 class. It may take a class work 3 class sessions to get to that same answer, but the students will understand it.
And they will stay with that.
And they will keep that, exactly. So, and there's a lot of other skills involved there as well. For example, decision making. Students are sitting down, they're talking with each other, and they're making decisions every step of the way. Which idea are we going to use? Is this idea better? Is that idea better? Is this true? Is that not true? The whole process involves so much decision making, and that is a skill because throughout your life, you're making decisions, And sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad. But if a student can learn how to make good decisions, then he can extrapolate this, extend this into his own personal life as well. Of course, it's fantastic. So we can't just look at the process as just only they're going to learn things intellectually. It is important to learn things intellectually. It is not important to memorize things. It's important to learn things intellectually.
Yeah.
Things like how to make decisions, how to collaborate, how to cooperate, how to develop high order thinking skills. These are important intellectual skills. How to investigate and how to find valid investigation sources. All of these things are important, much more important than memorizing that the capital of Ecuador is Quito.
Right. And going back to memorization and research, the importance of research is it's a very valid point because we usually hear the information from the radio, from the news station, and we assume that they are correct.
Right.
And if you create and develop in child that critical thinking mind,
The question,
wait a minute,
to ask questions.
this doesn't make sense. Let me check from other sources to see if that is
that's real. And it happens to all of us in our real life. They come and they tell, oh, I hear this, and that. And the first question I usually do, or usually say or ask is, where do you get that information? Oh, I got it from Facebook. I got it from Twitter. Okay. Do you have any other sources that, validate that information? No, but it's true. Are you sure it's true? You're making a life decision, which may affect you or may not, but you are assuming that something is correct from only one part of the information. It may have some correct information, but it may have also some very flawed, incorrect information. So we work very hard for our students to develop that creative and investigative mind, which is obviously developed until they are in 12th grade, right? And I like to talk about that because we get bombarded with false information all the time. Especially you get some emails and you have to be very careful because they can be fraud, right? And they usually look good. And if you don't, do your research and check the email precedents, then you find out if it's fraud or not, and with other information. So I think that's very important, right? We are creating, developing not only minds, but also the soul of our students, the emotions. With non-traditional education, it sticks very good with what we do here in our holistic approach, that not only academic, but also human characteristics that makes a human, right? We're not only academics, we're also emotions, and we're also character. We're also attitude, which is character. How a child can develop that. And when you were talking that you have 59 discipline problems once you started, and now it has reduced, there's still problems, but they know how they have tools to deal with them. And when they don't have the tools, then we as adults, we help them develop them and understand how can you work that in a humane way. So that's very, very important. And one of the things that we do here at writing school with our kids.
And it is crucial. We don't want the student who graduates who just knows that he's a bookworm.
He knows all the information. He's intelligent, but he doesn't have the heart to feel for someone else. He doesn't have that empathy, or doesn't have that kindness to see someone suffering and say, "Hey, I want to help that person."
Yeah.
I tell the students all the time that if you want to become a doctor, become a doctor. But don't become a doctor because you want to become rich. Become a doctor because it's in you really to want to help people. That you feel the suffering of people and you want to leave the people and the suffering of people. That's a good motivation to become a doctor. If it's just money, it is a motivation and it's a powerful motivation, but it's not the highest level motivation.
Yeah, and you can have all the money in the world, but you're not happy when you're doing it. You have to spend the money.
That is correct. That is correct.
So, but that's a self-discovery that all of us as humans have to work.
Sure. And we have to remember, this young students are still developing their identity. They're going to make mistakes. Sometimes I get a phone call from my parents saying, "Oh, this other student, he's so terrible." He's not a terrible student. He's in the process of discovering who he is.
Right.
And that process there, I know people who are 60 years old who don't know who they are. and they're bitter old people, you know, they're not happy with their lives. And this is not a good thing.
Yeah.
We want our students to go through the process, discover, and they should discover who they are along the way. Okay, that's what we want to do. And we don't want to take away that freedom of choice that they have to learn by themselves and from themselves who they truly are. Okay, and that's all part of education.
Okay, that's correct.
And it's never touched on by traditional education. Traditional education educates the mind, not the heart. And we call it here heartific education, the education of the heart. Okay, there are more stuff, you know, for example.
Let's have that for next episode.
Okay, sounds great.
What we're going to be discussing for next episode. One of the things that we want to go on the next series is to go with each particular strategy, right? Problem space, game based, and go a little bit further with that.
Yeah, we'll get into that. That's going to be in there, and when to use each one, because I think that's one of the things that, you know, we teach the strategies, but then you have to, you know, if I want to achieve this with my particular group of students, which of these 5 strategies is the best, and within those 5 strategies, which strategy within those 5 strategies is the best for me to use, and that's a lot of training for that, and a lot of, you know, it takes a long time to do that.
Well, thank you.
Thank you for having me again.
And I hope you guys are liking this podcast, educational podcast about what we do here with your kids at the school. And if you have any other questions or something that we would like us to talk about, feel free to write us. Have a good day.